Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 1 hour to get ready disaster preparedness class. My name is Quinn Gardner. I'm the emergency manager for the city of San Rafael. Today we have about a 45-minute or so presentation that really focuses on easy things that you can do at home, generally for free, in less than an hour to help you get better prepared. So we're going to dive through the presentation that you should be able to see on the screen. And our real objectives today are to help you understand why it's important to be prepared for disasters, and then really help you focus on three main factors, which is being informed and engaged, having a plan, and having supplies. So here we have kind of a highlight of some of our main hazards in San Rafael and Marin County. Whatever hazard brought you here today, I'm glad you're here. And if you get prepared for any hazard, you're probably more prepared for the other ones as well. So of course, we see localized flooding and sea level rise certainly has potential down the way. Mudslides, of course, fires is a big one on everyone's mind, especially this time of year. Power outages, especially after our 5-day countywide outage a few years ago. And then, of course, we have air quality issues, the pandemic, and of course, last but not least on the left there, earthquake risks. And this is not all of them by any stretch. But certainly some of the main ones that I think are top on everyone's mind. So what is an emergency versus a disaster? So this top image highlights an emergency, right? This is a home on fire. Potentially people are trapped and need help. And we have a system where you can call 911 and our firefighters and our law enforcement and our paramedics and maybe Red Cross comes to help shelter the family that might be displaced. Can come and address this situation. This is a really bad day for this family, but it is a localized emergency that our systems can support, as opposed to what we think of when we think of a disaster, which the bottom image is certainly a disaster. I believe that was from the North Bay fires. And that's a large scale incident, right, where the system can't expand quick enough or big enough to really be able to respond. And when we think about disasters, we know how important it is for neighbors to be prepared and for you to be individually prepared. And there's a great quote here by Dr. Lucy Jones. She's a seismologist, wrote a book called The Big Ones amongst many others. And she says, first responders will be overwhelmed and most victims will be rescued by their neighbors. And that's something that we see time and time again on major disasters. So it is so important and really appreciate everyone joining tonight or watching this on your own time and doing what you can to get prepared. If you like earthquake information, Dr. Jones is a great person to follow on social media. She's really good at taking the science and making it consumable. So we're going to talk a lot about what you need to be doing to get prepared. But before I dive into that, I like to make sure everybody understands what we do to be prepared and the different things in place. So San Rafael Emergency Management, we have an emergency operations center. This is not it. This is actually one out of the Midwest, but we have what's called a warm emergency operations center that can be set up really quickly. But what an EOC or an emergency operations center really is a place where all the subject matter experts can get together to coordinate and communicate and respond to the incident and support the field operations as best as we can. We organize EOCs by what's called the Incident Command System, or ICS. It's standard across the entire country. And so if something's too big for us here, either in the city, the county, or even in the state of California, we can have folks come in from all over the country and they know the roles and responsibilities. When they get plugged into a certain seat in a certain position, they know what that position is supposed to be doing. So ICS is a sprawling organizational chart, but at its heart, it's this bottom one that you see here that's quite simple and probably like a lot of things you see either in your daily life or your own business structure, right? You have a lead or a management system in place. You have operations, they're the doers. So for the city, that's a lot of our firefighters, our police officers, public works, the folks that are really out in the field taking care of things kind of with their hands, if you will. And we have planning, right? How are we going to do this? How do we get this? What do we need to think about 12 hours from now, 36 hours, 72 hours? How do we plan and how do we document as well? Logistics, the yellow is the stuff, the supplies. So everything from how do we feed all of our responders to how do we open mass shelters and how do we have enough supplies and facilities in place and how do we manage all the people? And then of course our green box, the money box, right? Finance, how are we going to pay for everything? How do we track things? Of course, finance and logistics work very closely together. But when we use that baseline structure, we can really operate seamlessly. And I like to share this too, because this is a very similar structure if you're interested in starting a neighborhood response group or a Firewise community or anything like that, to think about who's going to be the doers, who's the planners, who's taking care of the budget, who's getting the stuff, right, and who's our leadership structure. Using ICS also allows us to seamlessly collaborate with the county and other jurisdictions, like I mentioned. And then we have a local emergency operations plan, as well as a county and state emergency operations plan. So those are the big versions of this, of your personal emergency plan that we're going to talk about here. So disasters are a cycle, and we're always in sometimes multiple phases at once. And I think this is important, one, to recognize where we are, but also recognize where we may go. So mitigation is what we spend a lot of time and effort on before disaster. Think about what an example of mitigation might be that you can do in your own home. And one of the primary things we ask all of our residents to do is adjust their landscape to wildfire. So trimming back plants from your home, making sure you have good access and egress from your home, creating spacing between plants, all of that falls into mitigation. So does things like levee systems to prevent flooding. So anything we can do to minimize impacts before the disaster happens is mitigation. Whereas preparedness is a lot about training and planning and practicing. So that's a lot of what we're doing right now, is talking about preparedness and trying to get you in a mental mindset of being prepared. And then we look into response, which is the action, right? That's the scary time, but I like to break it down to really stay, go, and help. You have an initial decision to make. Am I safe where I am, or do I need to leave? And from there, you can start making other decisions. And then we get into recovery. And sometimes recovery is very quick. Take the recent fires we've had around the city and the county. While those are, pseudo disasters in terms of their response, they also are kind of not, because they didn't impact homes. But the recovery is a couple of days. Maybe we need to do a little bit of erosion control potentially to recover from some smaller fires. But then we can move right into mitigation. And I think I always want to point this out, because the transition between recovery and mitigation is a very important one. And when bad things happen, we need to put a lot of effort and time and money, quite frankly, into making sure we don't do things exactly the same way. So when you see, as an example, right, homes damaged by hurricanes, do you rebuild the house exactly as it was, or do you build it stronger with more hurricane strapping and different material and maybe elevate it even more? Another great example is power lines after tornadoes or ice storms. I joke in the Midwest, there's probably not a power pole that's more than a couple years old, because every time one falls over and breaks from whatever natural hazard, they just put the same thing back up. But that's really the opportunity to say, how do we prevent this and mitigate this from being a situation again? So that's a really important component there to think about, that transition from recovery to mitigation. And then of course, through recovery, we find our new sense of normal. So the big three that I started out the presentation with, that we're going to spend most of our time on, being informed and engaged, having and practicing a plan, and then the supplies. So being informed and engaged and being, listening to this presentation, being here is certainly the first step there. But there are some things you need to actively do. Generally speaking, all of our alerting systems are opt-in systems, which means you need to actively opt into the system in order to receive emergency alerts. So the top one here, is Nixle, and that's as easy as texting your zip code to 888-777. So in the to box is 888-777, and then in what would normally be your message or your text, that's where you just want to put your 5-digit zip code. You can text multiple times to register for multiple zip codes. Alert Marin, you need to go to the website, alertmarin.org, and register. And we get a lot of questions about what the difference is here. Alert Marin is the go-to system. Alert Marin allows us to geo-target. So with Alert Marin, you put in a specific address. So Alert Marin is what we use to issue evacuation orders, because we can issue them to very targeted areas. Whereas Nixle, the narrowest we can send a message is to an entire zip code, which is obviously quite broad. So you're going to get more generic messaging from Nixle, and you're going to get really specifics that apply to you through Alert Marin. PG&E also has alerts you're welcome to sign up for that'll touch more on the public safety power shutoffs, or if they're going to cut power. And then a new system in the county, or a new system for wildfire in the county, I should say, are the NOAA weather radios. So that's the image on the top right that says tornado. The NOAA weather radios have been around in the Midwest and areas that have more kind of emergent incidents like tornadoes for decades. But recently the Weather Service has also agreed to let us use them for fires. So they are much broader. They're not going to go off on a small incident, including any of the fires that we've had this year. But if there's a really major incident that's impacting a large swath, those NOAA weather radios are good redundancy tools, and they can just be plugged in all the time, and they have backup batteries in case the power goes out. So that's a good source of backup information to look into. And it's important to make sure you have alerts for everywhere you spend a lot of time, where you live, where you work, and where you play. So you might work in one zip code and live in another. So make sure you get signed up for alerts at those addresses. And the same holds true for schools or any other type of situation where you might want to be aware of what's happening in a particular area because a loved one's there. So you can register for alerts for multiple addresses and for multiple zip codes. The other piece about being informed and engaged, and this is certainly, I don't know if I've ever worked a disaster where this hasn't been the case, is rumor control, right? How do we manage rumors? How do we make sure information is coming from verified sources? I was slightly encouraged recently with one of the fires, and on my personal next door, you know, someone says what's going on, and then a lot of people said, I got this emergency alert, right? So how do you get the information from the source itself rather than trusting what might be going on social media, next door, et cetera. So make sure you're getting good verified information and that you're only sharing information that is timely. So don't share something that's hours old if it's an emerging, fast moving incident, right? And that you know it's coming from a good source. Please don't be part of the rumor mill. It takes a lot of time out of the response and can cost people their lives if they don't have the right information. 911 is not an information hotline. Please call 911 when you have emergencies and you need help. But looking for information, the answer is going to be sign up for alerts. And recently the county has activated a new emergency portal website that they update during emergencies. I believe it's emergency.marincounty.org. Great resource there. And then getting engaged. And this is a big piece of our neighbors helping neighbors. And there's a lot of different ways you can get engaged. I list a few here. CERT, or our community emergency response teams. It's a 20-hour class where you get to learn all sorts of tangible skills, everything from basic first aid to how to triage and how to work in that incident command system structure. Firewise is a great program that really says, how do we as a whole neighborhood adapt to living with fire and adjust our landscape, recognizing that you could do everything right, but if the neighbor right next to you hasn't, it could impact your home. So Firewise helps everyone work together. It's a great program, more information online. NRGs are neighborhood response groups. This is the idea of having block captains and having leaders that might know where someone that needs assistance evacuating or who has a child that might be home alone after school for a few hours, and how you can all work together. A lot of other great resources online. And I'm really excited for the city to be expanding that program here in the next couple months as well. And then Ready Marin is our go-to preparedness site for the county. A lot of this information is on there, certainly CERT and NRG information as well. So how do we engage our neighbors, right? How do we start talking to folks about this really important topic and why? And it's so important to know this. And this can happen even just, again, when we go back to the difference between emergency and disaster, even just on a basic emergency. Maybe you cut your finger a little bit too deep and you're not sure if you need stitches. Turns out you have a nurse or a doctor next door that might be able to help give you information or maybe help you control the bleeding. So knowing who's around you is really important on a day-to-day basis, of course, as well as during disasters. Knowing who has resources, who might need help, and creating those meeting places in your neighborhood so you can share information. We've seen some great efforts a couple years ago during the power outage where their neighborhood meeting places, people brought out portable generators so folks could charge their phones. So thinking some of that through ahead of time. And of course, over the last close to 2 years now, dealing with the pandemic, mental health and connecting and finding safe ways to connect is so important. So before I move on, I'll pause to kind of let everybody absorb, and if there's any questions when it comes to how to be informed and engaged. So we're going to get signed up for those alerts, and we're going to start talking to our neighbors. And as we move on to have and practice a plan, we're going to talk a lot about kind of what can we think about ahead of time. And it isn't complicated. The idea of writing a disaster plan might sound really scary, but it's not. And I actually have some great new printed materials that just came in that'll be available at our Public Safety Center. That there's a really handy booklet to help you walk through what you need to think about for a family communication or emergency plan. So I mentioned during a disaster, right, there's two options, there's stay or go. And so we really need to think through a plan for stay and a plan for go. I think the sheltering in place, unfortunately, might have become second nature to a lot of folks over the last couple of years. But fundamentally, we're going to stay where we are, right, when outside is more dangerous, when we don't have a safe way to get out. So that could include hazardous material spills, of course, a pandemic, air quality issues, power outages, or if there's an order issued. And one of the things I mean here by no safe egress is there's two examples I like to use. One is flooding. If you can get out ahead of the flood, get out ahead. But if by the time you decide to go, there's already way too much water on the road and you're safer in an elevated place, you don't want to try to drive through that water. The same might hold true in an extreme example of a fire. You might have a beautiful manicured property that's really well defensible and well maintained, but you have to drive down a windy road that has a bunch of trees and brush along it. It might be better to stay where you are, depending on what the situation is. So if you don't have a safe way out, sometimes it's safer to stay there or at a minimum call 911 and ask for guidance there. When we shelter in place, that's when we want to think through our disaster kits. And we want to make sure we stay informed. We don't make the decision to shelter in place and then not pay attention to anything. And then lastly, of course, is if at any point you feel unsafe, always evacuate. And if you think you're going to need more time, it might make sense, obviously, to evacuate earlier. So another time that we sheltered in place was, of course, the extended power outage. And that's largely right because of the impact of traffic signals and wanting to keep people safe and off the road and avoid any collisions. But when we're preparing to potentially power down, or when we get that alert from PG&E or from Alert Marin that says you might lose power for 12 hours, 24 hours, 72 hours, there's some things we can do to get ready. One of the first things I always do is make ice blocks. I just take Tupperware containers or whatever I have, fill them with water and throw them in the freezer. If I get those in ahead of time, I know I'm going to have some ice and ways to keep things cool. I want to make sure I'm charging everything I can, including my battery backups, fueling and charging vehicles. We saw in the 18 outage how many pumps and gas stations were not working because they rely on power for that process. Check your food supplies, eat your perishables that might go bad in the fridge. Keep your fridge and freezer closed as much as you can, and then make sure you have some shelf stable food that can kind of work through things. Make sure you're signed up for emergency alerts. Check in with your neighbors, see if they're signed up for alerts, if they need anything. Unplug things, and then you can prevent any surge damage when the power does come back on. Think about laundry. If you're someone like me that wears a uniform, I had to get my laundry done ahead of time, or it would have been a little stinky, right? And then turn off your irrigation systems. And again, this is even more important, of course, now that we're in the drought. But because we have gravity-fed systems, but we still rely on pumps to get the water up to those tanks. So it's important that we limit our water use to make sure we can maintain all of the other important things we need water for. So evacuating, when and why do we evacuate? Fire, of course, being the most prevalent or obvious. A tsunami threat if you're on the coast or in a low area. If you feel the ground shake and you're near water, assume there's a potential tsunami and head for higher ground. If your structure is unsafe, either because it's on fire, collapsed, etc. If there's predicted flooding, again, if you could get out ahead of it, great. If you get trapped, it might make sense to stay where you are. Or of course, at any point, if an order is issued. When we think about evacuating, we want to know we have at least two ways out of our home, as well as two ways out of our neighborhood. Certainly those can be tricky, multiple, you're on a second or third floor apartment, but try to find two ways out as best you can. If you really only have one one egress, find a good way to describe somewhere if you are trapped. So know which way is north, south, east, and west. So if that you need to tell a firefighter, I'm trapped on the 3rd floor, you can say I'm in the east facing window. And that way they know how to get to you as quickly as possible if you need help. Same thing with neighborhoods. We do try to have 2 ways out of neighborhoods, but there are certainly areas across the county where that's not the case. That's why mitigating is even more important in those areas, and leaving early when you can. And again, leaving early is certainly important, and leaving at the direction of officials. Please don't fight them. They're out there trying to keep you safe. And the quicker we can get people out, and we know it's an inconvenience, but once we know all the people are out safe, it lets us focus on getting that fire out as quickly as possible. And you want to have an ID meeting place identified. And ideally you have 2. You have one right outside your home, so that if there's a local emergency, like your home is the only thing on fire, you can get out and everybody meets and people aren't wandering around, or you're worried someone's still trapped inside when in reality they just went to the neighbor on the other side. So have a local meeting place. Mine was the mailbox across the street growing up. It doesn't have to be complicated. And then you want to have a meeting place outside your neighborhood. And that's going to help. One, if you have to evacuate and you get separated, you know where you can meet up if you don't have cell phones or cell phone communication. 2, if everyone's out and about when a bad thing happens and you can't get home and you can't communicate via phone, you have a meeting place that you've pre-identified that you can go meet at. So those are the things we want to think about when we're creating a plan. And then we also want to think about roles and responsibilities. Who's going to do what? Who grabs the dog? Who grabs the go bag? Who opens the fences? And we want to make sure we have a communication plan. And again, I mentioned we've got some great templates. We also have some wallet size booklets that can be really helpful. So stop by the Public Safety Center if there's any printed material you're interested in. And a communication plan really doesn't have to be overly complicated. The big thing is, do you have phone numbers written down? If your phone wasn't working, do you have any written or in your memory? And then you want to have an out of area contact. Because sometimes local cell phone towers can be overwhelmed, you might be able to reach somebody out of the area. So it's really important to have a out of area contact, ideally out of state, but at a minimum out of the nearby area. And then we've talked about having those meeting locations included in the plan. So once we create the plan, we want to make sure we share it with everybody we live with, as well as the people that we're including in the plan. So make sure your out of state contact knows they're your out of state contact. So when you call them and say, hey, earthquake just happened, but we're okay, let the whole family know. They know what that means and they know what to do, as opposed to kind of fluttering around and needing to take up time. Make sure everybody knows where things are. Do people know where the go bag is? Do you know where your first aid kit is? We did a great exercise a couple years ago at the fair, kind of match game style, where we gave folks that lived together dry erase boards and asked questions. Either part of your, who grabs the dog, right? Where's the go bag? And it was shocking how many people didn't have the same answer, right? They thought they knew, they thought they had a plan, but they weren't the same as the people they lived with. So it's really important to have those conversations and make sure everyone knows their roles, responsibilities, where things are, and what to do during a disaster. And then in addition to sharing your plan, I encourage everybody to also have plans shared with them. And what I mean by that is, especially with schools, right? If a school or your place of work has an emergency plan, you should know what it is. So if that hasn't been shared with you, or your kid's school hasn't shared an emergency plan with you, certainly encourage everyone to seek out that information. And then we want to practice. And this sometimes sounds silly, but it is really important. And there's physical practice and there's mental practice. So we want to engage everyone, and it gives us the opportunity to check timing and space. And I mean by that is, if we're going to pack our car, can we carry everything we think we can carry? Is my go bag too heavy? Do I need to get something that wheels? Whatever the case may be. Can I do things quickly enough? Or what I thought was going to take me 5 minutes is actually going to take me 30. And that's too long, and I need to shorten it down and figure out what's really most important to me. And then creating a ready culture. And this is the mental component of practicing. Great example, I recently was on a plane, and I'm the one that still looks at the emergency card. No matter how many times I've flown, right? I'm going to get out my emergency card and I'm going to listen as my flight attendants remind me of those safety procedures. Because one, that refreshes everything in my mind, and I can rely on instincts if something bad happens. And that's really important. So creating that ready culture, creating that mindset, where I have things ready to go and my mind is ready. I'm also the person that when I go into a theater or anywhere and they say, locate your nearest exit, I take that second and I locate the exit. And that's not because I'm paranoid or I live a life of fear. That's because I'm prepared and that's my mindset. And actually because of that, I'm probably less anxious and more calm because I feel like I have control of the situation, or at least a path to control the situation. So practicing our plans also allows us to review and update the material. So that's an important component there, and certainly encourage that constant revision and that constant, does this still make sense? I like to use daylight savings time or the clock switch, if you will, as a good time to review my plans and review my supplies. And we're going to talk about supplies here in a minute. So the physical practicing also, and this will be in October, we'll have the great shakeout, but you're welcome to do it before then. But we want to practice drop cover and holding on, especially the places we spend the most time, like our desks and our offices. In an old office, I had so many different things under my desk that when I actually went to get under my desk during a very small earthquake, I couldn't. I practiced during the shakeout. Remember, let me refresh that. I practiced during the shakeout, realized I had too much stuff under my desk, made some adjustments, and then a few months later, we did have a small shaker, but I was able to get under my desk because I had tested that out. So take the time. If you use any assisted devices, walkers, wheelchairs, etc., or don't have the physical ability to get on the ground, the most important thing to do is to cover your head, your neck, and your stomach. And you can do that with anything that's around. So even, right, if an earthquake happened right now, I could even use the keyboard, right, my Bluetooth keyboard to help protect me and cover me. So think about what's around you, certainly backpacks, purses, things like that. If you're not able to get on the ground and under something, try to find something you can put over you if possible. But we don't want to see you running around. You are more likely to get hurt trying to move during an earthquake than if you just stay put and protect those important areas. So gathering and organizing supplies. So this is the stuff, and I specifically call this section gather and organize because it is about that, and it's not about go out and spend a bunch of money. So we're going to talk through these items and give you some tips here. But the ultimate idea is that we want to prepare for what you'll need. So you want your go bag and your supplies to have what you need so that you have time to find what you want. And what I mean by that is the more you have together ahead of time, one, the less panicked you're going to be, and two, the more time you're going to allow yourself to take care of other things. So we're going to talk about go bags, grab and go lists, and home safety items through this section. So for go bags, it's really about short-term survival and comfort. How do I stay making good decisions? How do I have my basic necessities, right? Easy to transport. The formal recommendation is 3 bags, one at home, one at work, and one in your car. If you drive to work every day, you might be able to get away with one that's your car/work bag, but you do want to have at least 2. And certainly if you take public transit, keeping a comfy pair of clothes and things like that at work is really important in case you can't get home right away after an earthquake or something like that. And then survival kits are more focused on long-term survival and shelter in place. And they are going to be bulkier and have those bigger, heavier supplies. So go bags, and this is one of the most important things everybody can do. And in most cases, it starts with taking a junk drawer or something equivalent and dumping it in a backpack, right? So we're going to have water and snacks. Ideally have at least 1 bottle per person. For kits, we talk about 1 gallon per person per day, but water is heavy. So if you're more limited in what you can carry, at least having, a 16-ounce bottle or something like that. Make sure your snacks are things that you like. People always ask me, where can I buy a go bag? And I usually push people away from that because most of what you're paying for in a pre-made go bag is the food. And while it will store forever, it is probably not something you're ever actually going to want to have to eat. So I would much rather you go and get your favorite granola bar or power bar or fruit snack or whatever the case may be, and put those in your go bag so that they're things that you want rather than spend money on gross prepackaged, will survive the apocalypse and survive 20 years food. First aid and extra medication. So your first aid kit should certainly have some of the basics to keep you comfortable, handle any minor injuries. And extra medications, I totally recognize can be challenging. But if you spend a few months and you order your prescriptions a couple days early, a few months in a row, you usually can get a couple days or maybe even up to a week's worth of extra medication kind of on hand. And then you can keep that in your go bag. Just make sure you rotate it through before its expiration date. Again, that's why using the clock change is a helpful time to go. Good reminder twice a year, go in, make sure everything in your go bag is still up to date. Cash. And this was a big one during the power outages. We were out of, a lot of places can't take credit when the power is out. So having cash on hand is really important. Small bills are very important as well. Having some type of light source, a flashlight with extra batteries. Do store those batteries outside the flashlight so they don't wear down or they don't corrode, and they'll stay nice and fresh for you when you need them. This battery powered or crank radio is probably one of the only things I actually recommend in terms of purchasing. There's the yellow is the example, but you can get them that can solar charge, and they can charge devices out of them, and that you can actually crank a wheel to power them. And that also can be a fairly soothing thing during a stressful situation. So the radio keeps you informed. They make like all-in-one radio, flashlight, solar charge for maybe $20 or $30 online. So some really great options. That's probably one of the few things I'll strongly recommend is worth a purchase when it comes to this. N95, which pre-COVID was a lot easier to get, although I think they are coming back in stock. And that's really to help with smoke particles. So cloth masks aren't going to protect against smoke particles, and we don't want you to get smoke particles trapped between your cloth masks. So having N95s, especially for a fire evacuation, is important. And then gloves. And this is actually going to hold true on any disaster. You want to make sure you're always protecting your hands and your feet. You become much less operational if your hands and your feet are hurt. And so whether that's broken glass that you might have to move or something hot, you want to have gloves to protect your hands. And I just keep mine strapped right on the outside. Phone chargers and power banks. And the power bank is another potential purchase item. The phone chargers could just be extra power cables. But the power banks are nice. You can get solar charged ones, or I just have ones that I charge myself, but I also use them for travel and other things. I just keep them in my go bag, right? So some of these things you might already have for other purposes. It's just about how do I store them all together so that I'm ready for disaster. Toiletries and sanitation. These are a lot of want items, right? How are you going to stay comfortable if you have to move away from an area? So making sure that you have basic things like toothpaste, feminine hygiene products, whatever works, whatever you need. Think through those toiletries and sanitation items. And then maps, paper maps, right? We don't want to rely on our phones and GPS. And then important documents. And this is always a fairly confusing one for folks. Why do I need documents? And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but the quick answer is everyone that has ever worked disaster recovery in my profession, there are always people that is going to take them longer to recover because they need to get documents. And it will speed up your recovery if you have all these important documents on hand. So you can either have copies of them or even in theory, the originals that you keep in your go bag. I keep all mine in a fireproof box right next to my go bag. So they're a grab one, grab both kind of situation. You can put them into the cloud and then they're always remotely available. Or you could put them onto a flash drive and keep that flash drive in your go bag. So when we think about important documents, everything from birth certificates, marriage certificates, anything that's going to prove a relation, and that could help you get into the hospital, get visitation rights. If the worst happens, you have to claim a body or something like that. Having those documents that prove relationships is really important. Anything in terms of your housing, so leases, mortgages, deeds, right? Insurance paperwork is also super helpful and important. And then anything like work permits or anything else like that. So while all those documents exist somewhere else, if you have them all together, they're really important and they'll help your recovery quicker. And then of course, all of your identifying information, passport, driver's license, social security card, whatever you have that can help you reestablish your identity, because that's how you're going to start to get assistance. And make sure that your address is updated on things like your driver's license. That can be really important for re-entry. So if you have to evacuate an area, we're only going to let people back into that area sometimes that can prove that they live there. And we've seen that in a lot of different disaster areas. So having updated information and proof of residency, even just throwing a utility bill in your go bag could make a big difference. So have those things ready. And then I do keep a change of clothing in my go bag. I keep shoes next to it, but whatever works for you to stay comfortable. Disaster kits. Again, this is the shelter in place focus, the longer term survival. If I was a purist, I would tell you to pack all this stuff in Tupperware containers or rolling trash cans. But even if you just have a well-stocked pantry, that can go a long way and ultimately operate like a disaster kit. So fundamentally, to be able to shelter in place, I want you to have 3 days of non-perishable food, and water, right? And for the water, I said 1 gallon per person per day, and make sure you're including pets. So if you've got pets, you need more water. And if you're going to put food in your disaster kits that requires water for preparation, you're going to want to have even more water. So rice, quinoa, anything that you might need to cook with water, have more of it then. And then pet supplies are a big one. A lot of folks will make their own go bags for their pets, and that's absolutely wonderful. And at least having pets included in your disaster kit. Again, medications, the basics, identification. A great tip that I had from a resident once when it came to evacuating pets is to keep a Sharpie, and I do keep Sharpies and pens in my go bag so that you can write your information on your pet's stomach. The idea being that there's not hair on their stomach, but that way if you get separated, they lose their collar, your contact information's right there. And that same principle would hold really well for small children or anybody else that might get separated or have any type of intellectual or communication challenges, that if you can use that Sharpie and clearly communicate writing on skin or clothing, that can help during a disaster. Not all the time, but during that evacuation process. We want to make sure we're taking care of needs of anyone, children, of course, but this could fall for older adults or anyone with special needs, diapers, formula, etc. And of course, diapers are challenging because kids change diaper sizes. So just never be on the last of anything. And you're probably better prepared for disaster than you were. So if you're a procrastinator when it comes to getting supplies, try to be a little bit less of a procrastinator, and that's going to help you be better prepared for disasters. And then also think about clothing and shoes when you think about your disaster kits, and then think about anything that you might need to prepare your food, including a can opener if you're using cans, or a gas cooktop or camping. So I keep all my camping supplies in one Tupperware bin, and that basically serves as my disaster kit, right? Because if it's good enough for me to go camping with and be on my own, and that includes kind of some freeze-dried meals and things like that, in addition to keeping a well-stocked pantry. And sanitation, which of course we touched on in go bags, but this is your opportunity to have more than just what you can fit in a backpack. So you're thinking through that kind of stuff. So after the North Bay fires, there was a Facebook group that I haven't looked for in a while, it might still be out there, of survivors that basically started this thread that said, humor, right? Humor to recover. What was the crazy things you grabbed or did during the evacuation? And there's some things on here that, are obviously defying logic, and that's how our brains work in stressful situations. A container of zip ties with the confused emoji, right? Husband grabbed a Frisbee, packed all the wine and beer. Of course, it's the North Bay, so that's a big one for folks. T-ball trophies, the car keys, but we left the car, raincoats, painting pants and high heels. Piggy bank might not have been a terrible idea, right? It's a way to get cash. Unfortunately, in this case, there was only $2.35 on it. Someone mentioned their jury duty notice for the next day. Things like GameCube, if that's high value for you, that might make total sense. And dirty laundry, and everyone always laughs at that. And on one hand, it is kind of silly. Why'd you take your dirty laundry? On the other hand, if I have 10 seconds to pack, the place that has the most clothing and outfits, full outfits that are seasonal and still fit all in one place is probably my hamper. But I'm trying to reverse that strategy now and just never put away my clean clothes. And that way I'm always prepared just to grab and go if needed, but that doesn't go over always so well. So how do we avoid grabbing the crazy things? We do that through what is really simple as a grab and go list. And so we've put a lot of these need items, these basic survival things, food, water, medication, documents, into a go bag. And now we want to take time to establish a list of our want items. And my go bag list is literally, or my grab and go list is literally the back of an envelope on my fridge. This is not high tech or anything. This is one of the easiest things everybody can do, is go through this when you're in a clear state of mind, so that when you're stressed, you have everything you need ready to go. You can organize it either by priority or location. Priority is the recommendation unless you have a really large home, so you don't do a bunch of laps basically. But that way, if you're going by priority, if you run out of space or time, you just stop, and at least you know you had the most important things, right? And I'm not joking, my go bag literally says dog at the top. Not that I can ever imagine forgetting her, right? But I don't know exactly what my mind's going to do in a really stressful situation. So I want to make sure that that is the top priority. And then I have things even like wallet, phone, right on the top of that list so that I'm not forgetting those. And then I dive more into my want items, right? Photo albums, sentimental items, maybe they're high dollar value items like gaming systems, whatever matters most to you, computers, laptops, put those on that list. And then, like we talk about with disaster plans, practice. Does it all fit in your car? Maybe you have 10 boxes of photo albums and the most important photos are skewed throughout all 10 of those boxes. Maybe you want to take your 10 most important albums, put them in one box, and then let the other boxes, ideally you can take them all, right? But if you want to run out of time or space and you can only grab one, you've pre-organized in that way. And this is going to hasten your ability to evacuate and make sure that you're doing it with the things that you really want, and the things that mean the most to you, and not just what crazy stressed mind told you to grab. So home safety, and we're kind of nearing the end of the presentation, then we can take some questions after I stop the recording. So for home safety, this is, again, how do we mitigate risks around our home? In some ways we can do that, and a lot of this is earthquake focused in terms of strapping. So of course, by law, water heaters are required to be strapped. Bookshelves, right? Especially if it's behind you. In my old office, I had a bookshelf right behind me. So I had those straps on it so that if an earthquake happened, the bookshelf was also attached to the wall, but that wasn't going to fall and pin me, or those books weren't going to fall off and hit me in the head. Mounting TVs is an excellent way to assure they're not going to fall over. A lot of earthquake proofing is like toddler proofing, so keep that in mind. Be cautious of what's over your bed and your couch. They're the places that we spend the most time just being, which inherently means they're the most likely place we're going to be during an earthquake. And so when I first moved to California, this is an embarrassing story, but I like sharing with folks because I think it tells an important story, is that I literally had a piece of art that was nails on a board. And I hung it above my bed, and it probably lasted for like 3 weeks before I realized how ridiculous that was, because it wasn't attached to any way that was going to prevent it from falling, which was literally, right, a 1 in 3 chance, 8 hours a day I spend in bed, right, that was going to fall and hit me if I was home, if an earthquake happened. So think through those spaces. Make sure you're keeping, again, cars charged and full of gas. Museum putty is great. It's not necessarily going to prevent anything during a major earthquake, but we get a lot of little shakers, and that can prevent your favorite vase from falling over, broken glass, things like that. And then in the bottom left picture are shoes and flashlight in a bag tied to the bedpost. So they're in a bag to prevent glass or anything from getting in, and then they're tied there, so it's always there no matter how much things shake, so that if someone had to get out of bed in the middle of the night, they can protect their feet from any broken glass or other items, and then of course have the flashlight to see. And then I mentioned defensible space being one of the things we do to mitigate. So of course I work for the fire department, and I would be amiss not to remind everybody how important defensible space is. Contact us if you still need an evaluation. We're happy to come out and provide that one-on-one education, but it really just comes down to spacing. One shrub on fire in the middle of a whatever that's only going to burn that shrub, it's not going to hurt anybody or anything else. What we really need to do is prevent fire from carrying from one thing to another, and eventually impacting homes and people. So Keep that spacing horizontal and vertical. It's really important. Pick good plants, maintain them as best you can, particularly during the drought. And then on the right, we have some hardened home suggestions. And the big thing here is to get rid of any openings more than 1/4 inch, ideally down to 1/8 of an inch. That's going to prevent an ember from getting into your home and landing in your insulation or in your curtains or anything like that, or next to your home, and preventing those ember ignitions. And we got a lot more information on that. And actually tomorrow, which is the 16th, but there's Fire Safe Marin's new Fire Watch show is going to come out with some information, particularly pertaining to embers, that I encourage everybody to watch. So the big three: being informed and engaged, having and practicing a plan, right, and gathering and organizing the supplies and having everything on hand. So here's some resources for you. sroes.org, San Rafael Office of Emergency Services. That's basically my website. This course material is up there, as well as some plans, templates, and other things. Ready Marin, again, the county preparedness resource, great resource. Ready.gov is FEMA's website. They have this and a bunch of other free publications that you can request. So certainly, especially if you're any type of entity that works with a lot of people, or a neighborhood response group or anything like that, check out some of their material, and you can order some of that stuff for free. Earthquake Country, firesafemarin.org. And then if you have questions, that's one email that can get directly to me, as well as to the rest of the team, oes@cityofsanrafael.org. Follow all of our socials for good information, good tips. We are halfway through National Preparedness Month. We've been trying to put out at least a couple action items every week that are a lot of what's included in this presentation, but really quick and tangible things and steps you can take to help you be more prepared. So with that, I'm going to take questions. I'm going to stop the recording first.